who will defeat the Atiratas.
The great fighter who will defeat the Atiratas.
Veera, a great hero. Uttaraya, in the womb of Uttara. Tata, Abhimanyu, your good said. Translation, my dear King Parikshit, your father, Abhimanyu, was born from the womb of Subhadra as the son of Arjuna. He was the conqueror of all Atiratas, those who could fight the 1,000 charioteers. From him, by the womb of Uttara, the daughter of Viramraj, you were born. As said before, after the Kuru dynasty was annihilated in the battle of Kurukshetra, you also were about to be destroyed by the Brahmastra atomic weapon released by the son of Dronacharya. By the mercy of the Supreme Personality of God Krishna, you were saved from death. My dear King, your four sons, Janamejaya, Srutasena, Venus, and Vidursena, are very powerful. Janamejaya is the eldest. Because of your death by the Takshaka snake, your son, Janamejaya, will be very angry and will perform a sacrifice to kill all the snakes in the world. After conquering throughout the world and after accepting Turan, the son of Kalasha, as his priest, Janamejaya will form Asamita yagis, for which he'll be known as Turaga Pramasa. The son of Janamejaya, known as Sakranika, will learn from the three Vedas and the art of ritualistic ceremonies. We'll also learn the military art from Bhattacharya and the transcendental science. He said, the son of Satanika will be Sahasranika, and from him will come the son named Aspa. Amedaja, from Aspa Medaja will come Asima Krishna, and his son will be Nemi Chakra. When the town of Hastinapur is inundated by the river, Nemi Chakra will live in the place known as Kaushamba. His son will be celebrated as Chitrarata, and the son of Chitrarata will be Suchirata. From Suchirata will come the son named Vishtiman, and his son, Sushena, will be the emperor of the entire world. The son of Sushena will be Sunita. His son will be the Chaksu, and from the Chaksu will come a son named Sukinala. The son of Sukinala will be Pariplava, his son will be Sunana. From Sunana will come a son named Medavi, and from Medavi, Nipanjaya. From Nipanjaya, Durva, and from Durva, Kini. From Kini will come Brihadrata, and from Brihadrata, Sudasa, and from Sudasa, Satanika, and from Satanika will come Durnamana, and from him will come a son named Mahinara. The son of Mahinara will be Dandapani, and his son will be Nini, from whom King Shimaka will be born. I have now described to you the moon god's dynasty, which is the source of Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, and is worshipped by the demigods and great saints. In this Kali Yuga, Shimaka will be the last monarch. Now I shall describe to you the future Manga dynasty. Please listen. Sahadeva, the son of Jarasandha, will have a son named Marjorie, and from Marjorie will come Srutasrava, from Srutasrava, Yatayu, and from Yatayu, Niramitra. The son of Niramitra will be Sunakshatra, and from Sunakshatra will come Brihadsena, and from Brihadsena, Karmajit. The son of Karmajit will be Sutanjaya, the son of Sutanjaya will be Vipra, and his son will be Suchi. The son of Suchi will be Shema, and the son of Shema will be Suvrata, and the son of Suvrata will be Dharma Sutra. From Dharma Sutra will come Sama. From Sama, Jumaksena, and from Jumaksena, Sumati, and from Sumati, Subala. From Subala will come Sunita, and from Sunita, Satyajit, from Satyajit, Vishvajit, and from Vishvajit, Ripunjaya. All of these personalities belong to the dynasty of Brihadrata, which will rule the world for 1,000 years. For purposes of the history of a monarch that began with Jarasandha and continued for 1,000 years as the above-mentioned kings appeared on the surface of the globe. That's in the Bhagavatam. Purports of the 9th canto, 22nd chapter, Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled To the Sense of Ajahn. So here we have the conclusion of the dynasty of the moon. That means after the Pandavas, etc., and Krishna, etc., we have these the further descendants continuing for some time. But let us mention here that there will be an end to that. There was the last member of that dynasty. And then that concludes that. And then the Magadha dynasty of Jarasandha is described. And that lasts for 1,000 years. But even that one disappears after some time. So in this way we have the appearance of these different dynasties. The Kuru dynasty, I guess we can call it, the Pandavas and their descendants. And then Jarasandha dynasty. So these are material dynasties, and therefore they're subject to disappearance in this way. But even these dynasties, we will see, have some spiritual elements. So the spiritual element here is the Pandavas. So they appeared within that dynasty from the Kurus. But though the other members of the dynasty became demons, like Duryodhana and his brothers, Pandavas were devotees of the Lord. But they were not just normal devotees, because they're also considered Nityasiddhas. So therefore, they don't have spiritual bodies. They don't have material bodies. They have spiritual bodies. So a little different from all the other members of the dynasty. So we can obviously see that within these material dynasties, some of which, of course, are not so good, like Jarasandha dynasty or the Duryodhana brothers, the Lord, by His will, makes arrangement for devotees to appear, and they also are spiritual in their birth. It's not only the Lord who has a spiritual birth. As Nityasiddha devotees also have a spiritual birth in the material world. So technically they're not born at all. So therefore, for this reason, we find that the Pandavas had a very special relationship with the Lord, and they're considered very exalted more than other devotees because they're actually eternal. And the Lord has eternal pastimes with them in the spiritual world and within all the different universes. So they have a very, very special position. So we can wonder, how is this possible that these Nityasiddhas, who are also jivas, can expand themselves in this way? They have a spiritual form in the spiritual world, they have a form in the material world, and we have the activities of Krishna going on in countless universes, and along with them we have all these Nityasiddha devotees also in different universes, the same person. So we have Madhya Yashoda, Nanda, the Pandavas, and so many other persons in different universes, as well as in the spiritual world. Plus we have the pastimes going on uppercut in the material world, even in our universe now, in Dwarka, and Vrindavan, etc. So we have countless forms of the same jivas. How is it possible? But this is the arrangement of Krishna, Supreme Lord. So by the Achintya Shakti of the Lord, He expands not only Himself into countless universes, but even His devotees, where normally we don't have such power because they're jivas. But by the will of the Lord, for pastimes, we see how they expand. So, though the jiva is limited in powers, by the mercy of the Lord and the will of the Lord, then they have these remarkable forms in different universes. For the pastimes. They display pastimes with the Supreme Lord in different universes. Therefore, even the jivas are not limited, but this is by the will of the Supreme Lord. So of course, there is a limit upon the jiva. There are certain things the jiva cannot do. So that is why in the Nectar Devotion, there's a discussion of the qualities of Krishna in the 64 qualities. And of that, jivas can have 50 qualities in a small amount. So there are these extra qualities. 5 qualities that Shiva has that jivas don't have, 5 extra qualities that the Vishnu forms have that jivas don't have, plus the 4 that Krishna has. So there's a distinction. So even for the Nityasiddha jivas, there's certain things they do not do. So there is a limit upon that, even though they look like they can do spectacular things because they're spending it on the universe, just like the avatars. So, for instance, we find that the distinguishing qualities of the Vishnu forms over Shiva and over the regular jivas is that Lord creates universes. So jivas never create universes. Of course, we see stories here about certain sages can create a planet or something like that. So there's some, by yoga power or whatever, sometimes sages get special powers. But to create the whole universe, no jiva does that. That's ultimately Supreme Lord. So that is one of his particular powers. Another outstanding power of the Supreme Lord that distinguishes him from the jivas is that from him spring avatars, countless avatars. So therefore, on this, from this explanation, we see that jivas, by their will, cannot expand themselves into avatars everywhere in creation. Whenever they do expand, we see in these universes, it's by the will of the Supreme Lord only. So they're independent and they cannot do anything. It's the will of the Lord. So, therefore, the jivas, Nityasiddha jivas, and they look like they have great powers also, but still, there is a distinction between those jivas and the Supreme Lord. So, on the other hand, we have the jivas in the material world. If they do sadhana bhakti and they get perfection, then they are called sadhana siddhas. So they also attain a position like the Nityasiddhas because they don't fall from that position anymore. But they never lose their nature as jiva. So there is still a distinction, whether it's the sadhana siddhas or the Nityasiddhas. They never become the Supreme Lord in any sense or lose their power or turn into the Antaranga Shakti or anything else. They maintain their status as jiva. So that is their nature. So there are some clear distinctions made in the literature of the Jiva Goswami and Sandarbhas to distinguish the jivas from the Supreme Lord. So, therefore, the jivas are always jivas, whether they're sadhana siddhas or Nityasiddhas or whatever. So, the difference, of course, between the other jivas, the Buddha jivas, and the sadhana siddhas and the Nityasiddhas, the difference is that the sadhana siddhas and Nityasiddhas cannot be affected by ignorance. And those who are Buddha jivas are affected by ignorance. But the remarkable quality or the nature of the Buddha jiva is that by the mercy of Krishna and the devotees, that Buddha jiva can also get an eternal position with the Lord. So that's the great mercy of the Supreme Lord. That the Buddha jiva through sadhana becomes a sadhana siddha, and then he becomes eternally associated with the Supreme Lord. So, therefore, that Buddha jiva is not an eternal position. He's anadibhaya mukha, which means without beginning, he is bound up in the material world. But if he gets the mercy of the devotees and performs sadhana, then he gets an eternal position with the Supreme Lord. So, like the Nityasiddhas, the only difference in the Nityasiddha and the sadhana siddha is the sadhana siddhas were bound up at one time, but they got spiritual work and becomes eternal. The Nityasiddhas are never bound up by Maya at all, and never will be. So that's the only difference between the sadhana siddhas and the nitya siddhas. The sadhana siddhas have a history of being bound up. But in the spiritual world, no such distinctions are made. So the nitya siddhas don't look at the sadhana siddhas, so you're inferior because you came from the material world and you had some maya, and now you don't have maya. Well, they don't think like that. Once they're in the spiritual world, it becomes eternal. So they don't think of a past. The jiva himself does not think of his past. I was in the material world and I got to the spiritual world. When he's in the spiritual world, he only thinks of the eternal nature there. And he's in the spiritual world, and he's there eternally. So in that sense, there's no distinction between these sadhana siddhas and the nitya siddhas. And they don't feel there is a difference because there's no perception of those jivas coming from the material world. Nobody thinks of the material world in the spiritual world. Therefore, there is a perfection in the spiritual world, even if some of the jivas came from an imperfect state of being in ignorance at one time. So all of this is arrangement of the Supreme Lord. So by His great mercy, He allows those jivas who are not so qualified and have been covered by ignorance to develop themselves to a position where they attain eternal bliss with the Supreme Lord. So how does it happen? It happens because of the Lord's arrangements. The jiva on his own cannot really do anything, so it's the Lord's arrangements. But why does the Lord make arrangements for certain jivas? Because He is attracted to bhakti. So when that bhakti turns into prema, then the Lord is controlled. And He must do something for that jiva that's special. So when the jiva has prema, that Pladini Shakti and Samvit Shakti, which is composing prema, that becomes the eternal asset of the jiva. It sticks to him and it doesn't leave at that point. How is it possible? By the arrangement of the Lord. That's His arrangement. So it is the Shakti of the Lord that allows the jiva to go to the spiritual world and attain that eternal position. So that's why does the Lord do that? As I said, the Lord is controlled by bhakti, particularly prema. So when the jiva attains prema, then the Lord cannot bear separation from the jiva. So He cannot tolerate the jiva leaving him at any point in time. And of course, in the prema, the nature of the jiva is to never separate himself from the Supreme Lord. And the nature of prema is increasing bliss. So there's inconceivable that the jiva would never reject the Lord because the bliss is always increasing in prema. And the jiva has reached its capacity. The jiva by nature is a bhokta. He can experience happiness or bliss, and that capacity is reached in prema. So once that is reached, he doesn't desire anything inferior. So in Bhagavad Gita, of course, Krishna says if you have a higher taste, then you give up a lower taste. So that is the whole impetus of sadhana bhakti. By getting higher and higher taste, we give up association with the material world. And when the jiva takes prema, that taste of rasa is such that it's impossible for him to ever think of any other taste. So that is the nature of prema itself, actually. Of course, by the arrangement of the Supreme Lord. So, in this way, though the jivas in the material world are faulty, because they are covered by ignorance, and the ignorance is rejection of the Lord. So in that sense, they are faulty in the eyes of the Lord in one sense, because they reject the Lord. But the Lord, by His nature, is without any sense of hatred towards those jivas. Rather, He is also very compassionate to them. And for that reason, he makes this arrangement of the material world that we see here discussed through the different cantos. The creation of the material world, it makes all the little places for the jivas, from Patalaloka to Satyaloka, according to the qualities of the jivas. And he allows them to live there with material bodies. So they all get different types of material bodies according to their desires. And through that arrangement, the Lord, after he makes those material worlds, and then he arranges for some order by having the days and nights of Brahma, the years of Brahma, etc., time cycles, and arrangements for the Manus and their descendants to give intelligence to the jivas and raise them up to the gunas, control their tamasic natures, and allow them to rise up. And what do the Manus do? They implement Dharma, they give scriptures, etc., and they give bhakti. And of course the Lord has sages as well. He empowers sages to give knowledge. And then he comes as avatars to give knowledge and inspiration. He gives scriptures through the avatars and through the sages. And when the sages are not available, avatars are not available, and even the Dharma is not available through the Manus of Kali Yuga, still, the devotees are there. And they're the leading of the Shastra through the Prana process. So, the Lord makes countless arrangements for the jivas to get out of this miserable position of ignorance. They get knowledge, they get bhakti, and if they follow the correct process, then they can attain this eternal position with the Supreme Lord in prema, in the spiritual world. So, the arrangement of the Bhagavatam is such that the cantos, from canto 3 onwards, basically, up until 9, is a description of this arrangement within the material world. That you see the Swayambhuva Manu and the other Manus are described, and the descendants and the great kings who established Dharma and Bhakti, etc., all the way up to the 9th canto until we come to the appearance of Krishna. And then we can get the appearance of sages and avatars of the Supreme Lord, like Lasya and Burma and Varaha and Shrimadeva, etc., to give inspiration to the jivas. So, all of this arrangement is there for the benefit of the jivas. But the ultimate benefit for the jiva is the realization of the highest form of God, that is Krishna, Krishna. So, if one gets that fortune of getting attracted to Krishna, then his experience of that prema becomes different. So that's the special nature of the Bhagavatam, to show Krishna and that prema, which is remarkably different from the prema manifest with Ramchandra or Shrimadeva or Vishnu or Varaha or any other Bhagavatam. So that is a remarkable feature of the Bhagavatam. It presents through words of scripture the pastimes of Krishna, so that even though Krishna, we can't witness Krishna's pastimes, because that was 5,000 years ago, we can appreciate them through the words of the Bhagavatam. And of course, to do that, to make the words express Krishna or convey Krishna properly, we need a special medium. So one, of course, Vedas, who is Supreme Lord himself, not even a Shakti avatar in this case. And secondly, we have Sukadeva, who somehow or other got even more taste of Vasudev, even though he came from a different background of having been personal leanings, etc. But anyway, he got the mercy of Vedavyas, and Vedavyas taught him the Bhagavatam, and when it came out of the mouth of Sukadeva, it became even sweeter, because he relished the pastimes of Krishna more than even Vasudev could, and particularly the Madhurya Rasa. So therefore it becomes very special. And it is, of course, through that medium of realization of Sukadeva that the nature of Krishna is conveyed. So therefore, though Bhagavatam is made up of sound, words, etc., the words are very special because they come from the one who has experienced the nature of Krishna, that is the rasa of Krishna, right, Sukadeva. So therefore, the words are very powerful for us. So we have to appreciate the contributions of Vedas and Sukadeva by presenting Bhagavatam to us.
During the Bhagavatam, there are certain parts where Sukadeva Goswami is mentioning Srimad Bhagavatam, Maitreya, continuously is not spoken by those Sukadeva wanted talks.
Oh, well, from the second canto onwards until the middle of the 12th canto is Sukadeva speaking, and then he speaks, and then he recites what Maitreya said, or Vidura said, or Narada Muni said, or Vasudeva said this, or the sages, the sages, Navayogendras speak to King Nemi, or whatever. So it's basically his recitation of what they said. There's a conversation within a conversation, etc. So that's what most of the Bhagavatam is. So it's not that the Sutta begins speaking in the middle. Once in a while he may say something, but he just says one sentence, then it goes back to Sukadeva again. So the main text is Sukadeva speaking, and within that he relates the conversations of others, Narada and Brahma, etc., or Maitreya and Vidura, or whoever like this.
When you speak of Prema Bhakti, can you go to any Vishnu Tattva also? Vishnu Prema?
Yeah. Prema for any form of the Supreme Lord. But generally we see it is reserved for more powerful entities. So generally we don't get praying for Vyasadeva or things like Kapila Muni, things like this. So they do have, it's possible, but generally we don't see that. But we see one could have, there are worshippers of Varahadev or Nrsimha or Vishnu or Rama, so they get prema, definitely. They're bona fide forms of Bhagavan, so therefore there's an experience of prema with them. But it is limited largely to dasa.
Narrates the third and the 11th canto.
Third canto, that's also Sukadeva. Second also. Only the first canto is not Sukadeva.
Last time, 12.
And 12. Yeah, Sutta is speaking there. Sutta is speaking.
So Sutta is only saying what he heard from Sukadeva. And further explain.
Yeah. So it's considered, even though it's not spoken by Sukadeva, Vishnu Chakravarti says, we accept it as Bhagavatam also. Because it's connected to it, it's integral to it, because the first canto explains the history of how Sukadeva began to speak the Bhagavatam to Parikshit, etc. So when they saw Parikshit and everything, history of Sukadeva and Vyasadeva and Narada Muni, Vyasadeva, and all this, how it came out of it. So basically it's that. So therefore it's accepted as Bhagavatam and not spoken by Sukadeva.
Like behind the purpose, Bhaktivedanta is from the purpose. The purpose is speaking the purpose, speaking. It's also considered Bhagavatam. Purpose are there in the Bhagavatam purpose.
Yeah. So, yeah, of course we have, there's a distinction because we have what we call the text, the mula, the original text. And then we have commentaries. So we accept the commentaries also, because without the commentaries, we don't get the correct meaning. So Bhagavatam is the essence of all literature, but then it's considered to be like Mohini Avatar. And Mohini fooled the demons and stole the nectar and gave it to the Devatas. So in the same way, Bhagavatam fools the materialists. And they look at Bhagavatam, they do not get the nectar. And on the other hand, it is given through the devotees. So how is the nectar conveyed? Through the proper explanations of the acharyas. When we get their explanation, then we get the correct meaning of things. Otherwise, we may have misunderstanding and think this is material or whatever like that. And contradictory in some cases. So the contradictions are solved, and the real meaning of Bhagavatam is revealed through the acharyas, and we don't think it then doesn't become a material understanding.
You said that once Jiva bound up in this material world, only one time it happened, not the second time. But how to understand this statement? Because see, if he goes to spiritual also, because Jiva has a sense of I, that I exist, I am enjoyer, it might come back again.
Well, the possibility is there because Jiva is always Jiva,
Yeah.
even in Nityasiddha.
It is Tatastha also. Isn't Tatastha?
Yeah, but then the Nityasiddhas never fall.
But he doesn't.
That's the very nature of the Nityasiddha, he doesn't fall, he's Nitya.
This is there, from the beginning there are Nityasiddha, and from the beginning there are Nityabuddha.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, the nature says the sadhana siddha is by the mercy of the Lord, he gets the same type of position as the Nitya siddha. If he didn't, then we'll have a real problem in the spiritual world. Because we'll have inequality. Yeah? And then we get perfection. If there is inequality, then they're different, and there's something different about them, then we get a big problem there in the spiritual world itself.
Did any mention that how many of the sadhana siddhas have gone to Golokunda?
No. But the thing is that even though all the Buddhas in the material world is nothing compared to the jivas in the spiritual world, whether it's in sadhana siddhas or nitya siddhas. There's nothing comparison.
So this quantitatives, is about very few if you compare the spiritual world, because the quantity of jivas, amount of jivas that's in the material world is very few.
It's less, much less compared to who's in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
So ours are dwelling on what's in the material world because of our relative position actually is insignificant. So therefore it's like a cloud, little cloud in the sky that you can hardly see in comparison to the vast spiritual world. It's like nothing, a little spot. Just like if you're in there's no clouds in the sky at night and you can see all of the stars and that one little star over there is so insignificant in the whole universe. So in the same way, all the stars, all the galaxies, and everything together, it's a little spot in the sky, spiritual sky, it's nothing.
So can you say that in the sense, that the material world also is a part of the spiritual world, because it's in the spiritual world?
Well, it's enclosed. Of course, we can't really explain it in terms of space because space is a material concept itself. But we can say that actually it is enclosed in the whole spiritual world. We can't really locate it at the bottom or at the top or anywhere. The spiritual world is everywhere.
Yeah.
And within that, we get this little location called the material world. So it's actually surrounded by so that's why they call it causal ocean and all this is like a buffer state between the spiritual world and the material world. But all around that causal ocean is spiritual world.
Yeah.
So basically everything is spiritual world. There's a little spot within that exists as the material world. But it's hard we can't really define it in terms of time and space. Because spiritual world has no time and space, like we know it. So therefore time and space come from our concept. So therefore we can't apply our time and space definition to the spiritual world, say it's so wide or something like that. It's impossible for us to conceive of.
In the material world, there's a database and record for every activity. Somebody's getting awards so many, Paramit Chakra, Republic Day, so are getting award. In Bhagavatam also, there's some characters mentioned that they have gone back to Lord, like Putana. Like many of the ordinary jivas, when they go back, then anyway Putana, there's no record. If you somewhere record that so many jivas have gone back.
Oh.
Somewhere,
well, we don't find a record recorded in the history. Of course, the Supreme Lord knows everything, so it's in his records. And automatically know everything, so that they have the record. And everybody in the material world, their record is kept with the law of karma. And the law of karma, of course, everybody does, past, present, and I guess that record is permanent there also, under the control of karma.
Maybe Chitragupta has this record.
There is this mention about when the Yamadutas came, there were 3 Yamadutas. I do not know the authenticity of it, but the 3 Yamadutas were actually representing that one of them represent the activities that you do by mind, by your body, and by your action or something like that. So the 3 Yamadutas represent, which means there were some records that were kept actually according
to... Well, it says that, what's it, Chitragupta?
Yeah.
Is the record keeper for Yamaraj, so he has a little record there of all your activities, each jiva's activities, so in that sense. Of course, maybe that's a gross way of saying it because they probably don't have records in the sense that we have records. They have to write it down like that. sophisticated way of doing it, but in one sense, yes, everything is recorded or everything is known. The other concept, of course, is what's called Akash records. Everything's recorded in the Akash. So there's a record of everything. This, of course, is not a Bhagavad concept, but possibly it's there that everything that happened has a permanent record, but not on the material level, on the gross material level, on a very subtle level. Because we don't understand what time is even, so somehow, when you get more and more subtle, there's a record of everything, of the past, up until the present. So if you have the ability, you can get into that and see. So Yamaraj has access to that.
But how does Chitragupta get this information from? Does the Paramatma communicate? How does it? Because he's not all pervading.
Well, obviously Yamaraj and his servants have special powers because they have that duty to get karma, so therefore they have their own means of getting it. Just like David has also special powers by which they can also help to allot your karmas. So all of this is like special powers are given to them to do their duties, that's all. Their minds are only different from us. Just like Brahma has special powers by which through his mind and through sound he creates the universe. He's not doing physical labor as such. It's all on a much higher level of the material world.
Like modern people, they have Wi-Fi and broadband. For them, it's not a big thing for demigods and emeralds.
Yeah, so even like radio for us is that's such a primitive thing now. Like radio, does anyone listen to radio? it's a primitive thing. But for people 100 years ago, it was inconceivable. What is a radio? A sound coming through the air. They couldn't conceive of that sort of thing. So material world is all sorts of shakti that has to be discovered. And we discovered a little bit of it, but there's much, much more there also. So therefore they take advantage of the Shakti and do different things like karma, a lot of karma, etc.
Maharaj, in relation to Jiva in spiritual world, like you have stated several times in the lectures that unless otherwise the Jiva is pure, completely purified, it may not, it will not go to spiritual world. In that stage, maybe Jiva would not have any free will, right? Probably in spiritual world. A Jiva may not have a free will to think on its own.
No, the nature of the Jiva is there still. That's why you're reading Jiva. If he doesn't have free will, he would be Supreme Lord.
Yeah.
So he is Jiva, which means he's a separate sense of I and his own free will. But the experience of the Jiva is such that if he has prema, that higher taste does not make him attracted to anything else. And it simply increases all the time. That's his nature.
And also, is it good to understand that, like, for example, when a Jiva goes to spiritual world, Jiva doesn't have any records about the material world and whatever happened here in the material world. So it's totally purged. So maybe Jiva also doesn't really think about there is something called material world or I want. Yeah. So I want to enjoy independently of the Supreme Lord. That the possibility itself is not there. Though there is a free will, the possibility itself is not there.
Well, yeah, in that sense, but that's simply a result of their absorption and prema. That you don't think that. Prema means there's no room for ignorance. Yeah. It's not there. Zero ignorance. So then there's no concept of enjoying anything except giving enjoyment to Krishna. And that's a qualification for the spiritual world. If there is some little impurity, they don't go.
But in the material world, when someone gets the prema, he might have that experience also, suffering also.
Yeah. Well, that's the difference between the material world and the spiritual world. That's why generally the Lord takes those who prema in the spiritual world eventually if they give up the material body. The limitations on the material body, obviously. You cannot experience even full prema in the material body. The higher levels cannot be experienced. And of course, then the material body is subject to death, old age, disease, etc. Obviously. Of course, the prema body is not really affected by that, but it's some sort of limitation.
Also mentioned, Lord is always angry that when will the Jivas come to my abode? He's always feeling the separation. I want all Jivas to come back to my abode. That means what? They will be seeing what? Why he's feeling
Well,
that?
if he's in the spiritual world, then he's only involved in his pastimes. When he, in his expansion, has the Paramatma features, then definitely he's serving the jivas in the material world in that sense. So as Bhagavan is only in this spiritual world, doesn't worry about anything. But he has this function as Paramatma who takes care of all these things in the material world to bring the jivas out. So that's the expression of his compassion, through his expansion. expansion.
But there is a statement also, about this. So that, some Sundar said, the material world will be always full. Material world will be always full of jivas. That not that once the material will be completely empty.
Yeah.
It will be like this. If Lords want that, okay, all jivas will come to spiritual world, then material will be completely empty.
Yeah.
So there is then this material there will not be material world at all.
Yeah.
But that's also there. Then how can he wants everyone to be spiritual?
Well, the Lord wants all the jivas to go to the spiritual world. Not all of them want to. That's all.
Yeah.
They'd like to stay in the material world. Then what can he do? So it's not that the Lord forces them. So they have their free will.
Sometimes the parents take the children to the beach. The sun is setting. The children don't want to come back. So the mother pulls the child and takes back. You've seen many times. The child doesn't want to go. They want to play with the sand. The mother says, no, it's time out. It's not going to go home. And they put in the car and go.
Yeah.
That can also happen. The Lord can. He wants to take us.
Well, he does that in certain cases, like the Putin or somebody like that. But it's not that all of them. Because, on the other hand, though we can give the example of the mother and the small children, in a sense, these are very special children because they take birth after birth after birth after birth in the material world, and they keep insisting on the same thing over and over again, in spite of the Lord's attempts. So at a certain stage, maybe the mother will just give up on the child and say, okay, you stay whatever, do whatever you want, I'm going home.
Maharaj, Shruti Sastra Nunda, we translate in English like Vedic literatures or literature in pursuance of Vedic version. So, like, what are the literatures we should consider in? I mean, say for example, now a lot of devotees they write books. So, is it also considered as a pursuance of Vedic literature?
Yeah, well, we have Shruti, which is the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Brahmanas and Aranyakas. That's basically what is Shruti in the conventional sense. And then we have the other pursuant literatures, which means Itihas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Puranas, 18 Puranas, and Smritis, like Bhanu Swami, I think 18 or 21 of those, Pancharatra Shastras, 108 of those, and other works as well. We have sutras and other things like that. So they're all included in that. And then we have works which are non-contradictory to that and support that, and commentaries. And it's all considered scripture.
Past tense and Buddhivan past tense, they give some visible manifestation. So Apaka Leela also will leave some impressions in the material world.
By the will of the Lord, yeah.
Sadhana says the devotee goes back to the spiritual world. He said that 21 generations also go back. Those 21 generations are not pure. So when they go back to the spiritual world, don't they create disturbance?
What's that?
When a sadhana says devotee goes back to the spiritual world, the relatives, 21 generations.
It takes 21 generations.
Oh, does it specifically say that?
They get delivered.
They get delivered, so it's a rather vague term. At least they get purified and they get some chance to, advance spiritually.
Yes.
So we can never, in most cases, as far as jivas are concerned, the Lord, if He wants to, can immediately take a jiva to the spiritual world. Generally, and sometimes even Narada Muni or a special person like that, by his special mercy, Kripa Siddhi, a jiva can advance very quickly. Normally, in the case of what we call Agyata Sukriti, where there's, despite being born in a certain family, then they get blessed or whatever, then we won't see such a powerful effect of immediately ending up in the spiritual world. But at least they get the chance to advance.
That means they get both in a Vaishnava family.
Yeah, like that. They get a chance to advance, and by their sadhana, then they can attain to that.
It's not like ISKCON life number that person becomes a member and right gets the accommodation free.